A 2-0 win over Venezuela in front of not many fans in Fort Lauderdale at the pink plastic stadium that Inter Miami currently play in. But an important win to get some goals to end 2025 on a higher note, because if this was another 0-0 draw, or let alone a 1-0 loss or something like that, things could have been pretty dire going into the next 4 months. And realistically, January, whether there's a camp or not, and you're playing, some opponent or not in an unofficial match, it doesn't really impact things, Brendan.
It's all about perspective, right? I think it could have felt pretty dire, but if they had drawn 0-0, if they didn't find the net at all against Venezuela, but they played 80% of what we saw last night, I don't think we would say it was completely dire. It's great that they score goals, and they got another test, which I think will replicate what they could face in the World Cup, which is playing down a man. I think it would be unlikely that they would be down a man 3 minutes after getting a man advantage. That just doesn't happen statistically very often in sport of football. But the way Canada responded, I thought they played well. And then it gives us something to talk about. I certainly hope that it's just a 1-game suspension that can apply to whatever the spring friendly or the June tune-up is for Ishmael Kone. So we're not talking about him potentially missing a World Cup opener. But overall, I thought, really the kind of the glaring takeaway is that Jonathan David wasn't at the center of this scoring and wasn't involved, and if anything felt in the way or an obstacle at times. That's really kind of the takeaway, glaring negative to link it towards feeling dire.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, because you're right. Like, I think it wasn't a great game from Canada, but I think that's just because of the expectations we had, that like it wasn't bad. Like, they were solid for portions. It just felt like you can tell where they've been really good. Like, they were fantastic defensively again. Kudos to Alfie Jones. You make your international debut after a weird week where you've been waiting on an oath, and you're thrust in and you look great. Max Crepeau goes back into goal, keeps another clean sheet. Derek Cornelius, well, that's a bit of a concern, but Joel Waterman comes off the bench, does a shift. Richie Larea, another fantastic game. Same with Nico Seeger, great assists. Like, that was all good. Eustachio, I thought, had another outstanding game. He's consistently been really good, even though he's not playing at his club level. But then the attack at the same time, it was robotic. And I think that adds an extra layer, because we know the defense is good and we wanted to see goals. And I think we wanted to see a bit more authority that just wasn't there for Canada. So it is tough to gauge, because I think while it was a comfortable win, and if Canada were to win a game like that at the World Cup, I don't think anyone would complain. You would like to see a bit more juice. And to that, I would thank Promise David, because I do think had he not come on and scored, there would have been different discussion. But at least Promise David scoring gives us something to talk about for the next 4 months, which I think we're going to be hearing a lot about Promise David, because now the numbers are looking good for him. And he continues to be hard to deny, even in limited minutes.
And he was the key of a lot of our listener questions as well. And Jesse Marsch said before this window that Taniela Wasei was the front runner to be that strike partner for Jonathan David. I still think we're in a world, even with the underwhelming performances from Jonathan David, that he's not getting dropped from this lineup. And hopefully over the next 4 months, he finds his form with Juventus, or maybe he goes on loan and finds his form and comes into the Canadian men's national team in March in better form, and is able to translate that into the World Cup as well, because I think we can all agree that he's probably, if Canada is going to win a lot of World Cup games, or 2 or 3, and go through to a knockout stage, or let alone the idea of a potential quarterfinal, I think at best Jonathan David's going to have to score goals. You're not relying on the secondary striker. Jonathan David and Alphonso Davies are the most important players on this team if they are at their best. It's the same with Christian Pulisic and the U.S. men's national team, and Norway and Erling Haaland, and you can go down the list. But did Promise David make a case for himself to be a starter? Because it seems like he doesn't necessarily fit what Jesse Marsch is looking for, but his goals to minutes ratio has been outstanding, Brendan.
Yeah, his goals to minutes ratio has been great. And I think, whether it's just more familiarity, whether it's just more time, I do think that obviously we know that Jesse Marsch's system is very complex. And while a lot of those players, were blooded into that system in an incredibly intensive 21-day or 27-day period, whatever it was, through Copa America, with those 2 high impact, high volume, highest profile friendlies Canada's ever had, in the Netherlands and France. I think that there was a level of indoctrination that those players really benefited from, and Promise David wasn't a part of that. And the way that Royal Union Saint-Gilloise play, and in general the way a lot of other teams play, this is a very foreign concept. We know that Promise David has some tremendous physical attributes. Seems like someone that could slot into that. Perhaps it's just more time, or perhaps that Jesse Marsch really just trusts his other players to play both sides of the ball better, and that includes Jonathan David, even though he's not performing to that level. And Promise David is not someone that totally fits that. But the super sub capabilities, which we also see in Belgium with this club team, are undeniable. So is he deserving of half an hour? Does it put more pressure, on the starter that they're not getting more than 60 minutes? I think that's the scenario that we're in right now. And I agree that it's probably Tani over Kyle Larin to me. But to your point about Jonathan David, I think if Kyle Larin has a great winter and a good start to the club season, and that's a big ask, but if he does, I think he can take that spot back. I think he has Jesse Marsch's trust, even if he hasn't earned it in a Canada shirt over the last few months. He still has Jesse Marsch's trust to get that spot back. So I would say Tani and then Larin, Promise are probably 1A right now, but I don't think that Promise will be starting come June.
And on Promise as well, you can take a bit of a page out of Whitecaps head coach Jesper Sorensen's book, Alex, because Jesper Sorensen has said that he wants to focus on his ending 11 as much as he does his starting 11. And maybe Promise David, when you look at his goals to minutes ratio where he's able to score and his impact off the bench, maybe he's a ending 11 player that you want on the Canadian men's national team, and not necessarily the same player if he were among the 11 starters, Alex.
Yeah, well, that's one caveat I guess you have with Promise David, and this is always a discussion you have when you look at, because he's not the first striker that has had incredible rate stats in limited minutes, and then maybe you see that all the time where you thrust a striker in and it's different to start, because there are advantages to coming off the bench, tired legs, stretch games. At the same time, Promise David has shown for Union Saint-Gilloise in Canada, if you start him or if you bring him off the bench, his numbers don't really change. He creates goals, he creates chances. The thing is with Promise David, that's becoming harder and harder to reconcile. And I think him coming on and scoring just cemented that. Like, goals happen. Like, he has 3 goals in 201 minutes. He's averaging 1.34 goals per 90, which is just absurd. Like, you'd take half of that and that would be elite. 3 goals, by the way, is the 4th most goals any player has scored under Jesse Marsch. They've played, I think they're now up to 26 games under Jesse, or 27 games now they're up to under Jesse Marsch, technically, because I know Mauro Biello took charge for a few of them, but in the Jesse Marsch era, 4th in 201 minutes. And the ones ahead of him are Jonathan David, obviously he's got 11, and it's Tejan Buchanan with 4 and Jacob Schaufelberg with 4. So Promise David scores again next window. He's tied for 2nd in the Jesse Marsch era. At a certain point, for a team that's struggling to score, it's a solution you got to look at, especially when in the 2 games he started, Ukraine and El Salvador, his rate stats stayed the same. He generated a lot of shots. He got high XG. He gets touches in the box. There isn't, a significant drop off. So it is something to ponder, because Canada's elite defensively right now. Like, it's become that point. They've conceded 8 goals in 12 games in 2025. They have 8 clean sheets. It's something absurd. Like, they conceded 1 goal after the Gold Cup in their last 6 games. That's where you look at, and that starts with the work of Tenny Oluwaseyi, Ali Ahmed, Tejan Buchanan, Jonathan David. You can't discount that. But are you telling me that if you put in Promise David, I don't know how, like, if Canada's not going to go from elite and they're going to concede a bunch of goals, and even if the trade-off is 1 or 2 more goals conceded, if you're telling me Promise David is on the pitch and he's scoring, helping you score 2 or 3 or 4 more, is that a trade-off that's not more worth it at this point? Because it is a balance of, yes, being really good defensively will get you through the World Cup, but you do got to get out the group stages, and it would sure help to be able to score a goal or 2 and early in a game, and then maybe you bring on the guys who can help you lock it down. So I think it's a discussion Jesse Marsch needs to have, because the fact that Promise David has had such limited minutes, it doesn't even need to be a big cameo. It can be literally 45 to 60 minutes as a starter off the bench. It's just the fact that it's these 10, 15, 20-minute cameos when Canada's clearly struggling to score. It feels like we're at a certain point. like, Promise David has as many goals in the Jesse Marsch era as Taniela Wache and Kyle Larin combined. At a certain point, you got to look at all these numbers and at least give them a shot.
And Canada seems to still shine in transition, and that's the way that this team is probably going to play going forward. It's the way that Jesse Marsch teams play, even though maybe Canada is not as high pressing and as high scoring as Jesse Marsch would want his teams to be. But it seems to still be a problem when Canada is in possession. And that hasn't necessarily solved itself, even with Ishmael Kone and Stefan Eustáquio. I looked back, and I think it's 5 of the last 6 games they've started as the midfield pivot. They seem to be the first choice going forward. And it still seems like Canada doesn't exactly have an idea of what to do when they have the ball, Brendan.
I don't know if I entirely put that down to them, to be honest. I don't know if that's... I will state that I do have this incredible bias, of course, towards Stefan Eustáquio, but also to Ishmael Kone in a way, because I think when they are together, and you see this for Canada, I think that 9 times out of 10, Ishmael Kone seems to be playing to his potential or to the level we expect or beyond when he is next to Stefan Eustáquio. And for the most part, we would say that Ishmael Kone has played very well in a Canada shirt. And I just don't trust the talents behind them as much as you guys do, albeit I see the qualities in Nathan Saliba, who I'm still going to pronounce in English, and Mathieu Choinière. But I just feel that those two are still better. I do kind of feel like, when they have struggle to create and move the ball forward, I'm blaming the wingers. I'm blaming up front. I'm blaming number 10. I'm blaming the positioning of Kyle Larin and Jonathan David not being on the same page. I don't feel like when I'm watching the game, it's that the problem is there in the midfield. But I'm watching it with very different, older eyes than you, Alex.
No, I think you're right in the sense that Canada does do a good job from the back. What I will say, they are maybe a bit too reliant on long balls from the keeper, right? Like there was a few times yesterday where I thought like Max Crepeau has the quality and just instinctually maybe hit it a bit longer than he could have, right? Same with the center backs, but for the most part, they progress the ball well. It's really the wide players, right? It's really the wide players in the attack, and it's not the wide players themselves. I think it's how they're set up. Like, for example, Tajon Buchanan, Ben actually had a good observation there in his, not to say actually, but just I read it a few days ago, and it's a good point. Tajon Buchanan so often is isolated one-on-one, and it's tough because as a defender, they can put focus on Tajon Buchanan because they know how he dribbles. They know he likes to take guys on. It would do him a world of good if Nico Seeger could get up and join him more often, but that's not the style, right? Nico Seeger kind of naturally has to drop in a bit deeper. On the left, for example, it's not a coincidence that Richie Larea helped create the first goal. The first goal, it was ugly. It was like 3 deflections, but what happens on it are 3 things I like. The first one is Richie Larea comes up and creates an overload. Boom, that's one. Richie Larea then delivers a good low ball into the box. I like that because when you put in a low cross, missed kicks can happen, the ball can squirt loose. And then the third thing, and they pointed out this quite astutely as well on the TSN broadcast, there were 5 guys in the box. That is not something we've seen enough. Like in the Australia game, when I watched back, the amount of times Canada would beat a guy and actually be in a good crossing position, but then you'd look up and there were 2 guys in the box. It was a lot. So I think those are the sorts of things that stand out for me from Canada.